My sister locked my sick son in a freezing basement, so I made sure she lost everything. She ignored his cries, took his phone, and left him shivering and alone, all because he was ruining the party. When I found out, I took him straight to the hospital and took her straight to CPS. Now she's banned from being alone with kids, cut out of the family trust, and losing everything she thought she'd get away with. Family has always been complicated, but I never thought I'd be in a situation where I'd have to question whether blood really means anything. Growing up, my sister and I were close. We lost our mom a few years ago, and that somehow brought us even closer, at least that's what I thought. My dad always tried to keep the family together, and my sister Emily was someone I trusted completely. That's why what happened at my nephew's birthday party completely shattered the way I saw her. Emily is married to Jason, and they have an 8-year-old son, Dylan. My own son, Ethan, is also 8, and the two of them are practically inseparable. They go to the same school, have the same group of friends, and spend a lot of time together. We've always made sure they have a strong bond because, at the end of the day, family should be there for each other. That's why when Emily invited Ethan to Dylan's birthday party, it was a no-brainer. It was supposed to be a fun night for the kids and an easy evening for me and my wife Sarah. But things didn't go the way any of us expected. The day of the party, Ethan wasn't feeling his best. He had been a little under the weather the past couple of days. Not anything serious, just a bit sluggish and tired. I asked him several times if he really wanted to go. "Are you sure, buddy? You don't have to go if you don't feel up to it." But like any 8-year-old who didn't want to miss out on a fun time with his friends, he insisted he was fine. So I let him go. He didn't look too bad, just a little tired, but nothing that seemed concerning enough to keep him home. I figured a night with his friends might actually lift his spirits. Kids bounce back fast, right? Emily had everything set up for a big birthday bash. She always loved throwing over-the-top parties for Dylan, and this one was no different. She had a backyard full of decorations, a table stacked with gifts, and a bunch of their school friends running around. It seemed like the perfect night for an 8-year-old. Before dropping him off, I pulled Emily aside and let her know, "Hey, just a heads up, Ethan wasn't feeling great earlier. Let me know if anything seems off, and I'll come pick him up early." She waved me off, assuring me it was no big deal. "Oh, he'll be fine. Kids get tired, but once he's running around with his friends, he'll forget all about it." I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my sister. With Ethan at the party, Sarah and I decided to take advantage of the free evening. It wasn't often we had a night to ourselves, so we planned a simple evening, running a few errands, grabbing dinner, and catching a movie. It was supposed to be a relaxing night, and for the first couple of hours it was. Every now and then I'd glance at my phone expecting a text or call from Emily, just in case Ethan wasn't feeling well. But there was nothing. No updates. No missed calls. Still, I wasn't too worried. No news is good news, right? Little did I know, while I was sitting in a comfortable movie theater, my son was trapped in a freezing basement, scared, sick, and completely alone. Ethan had barely been at the party for an hour before he started feeling worse. What had been just a little tiredness earlier had turned into full-on exhaustion. His head hurt, his stomach churned, and the noise from all the kids running around made everything feel worse. First, he tried to push through it. He didn't want to be the kid who ruined the fun. But after a while, he couldn't keep pretending. He went up to Emily, tugged on her sleeve, and told her he needed to call me. "I don't feel good," he said, his voice small. "I want to go home." Instead of taking him seriously, Emily barely even looked at him. "Oh, come on, Ethan. You're fine," she said, waving him off. "It's just all the excitement. Go drink some water and sit down for a bit." But that didn't help. His head kept spinning and he felt like he might throw up. Again he went to Emily. "Aunt Emily, please. I need to call my dad." And this time she got annoyed. Emily has always been a little strict about discipline. She's the type of mom who believes kids should toughen up and not be too soft. So when Ethan kept asking to call me, she didn't see it as a sick child asking for help. She saw it as a kid being dramatic and trying to get attention. According to her, he was whining too much and was going to ruin Dylan's birthday party. So she decided to teach him a lesson. Instead of letting him call me, instead of even giving him a quiet place to rest upstairs, she locked him in the basement. She told him he needed a timeout for complaining too much, that he should wait it out until the party was over. The basement in Emily's house isn't some cozy, finished family room. It's cold, damp, and barely used except for storage. There was no couch, no blankets, just boxes, an old treadmill, and a cement floor. And she left him down there alone while the rest of the kids continued to have fun upstairs. First, Ethan was confused. He didn't understand why she was doing this. But then, as the minutes passed and the sickness got worse, panic started to set in. He felt like he was going to throw up, but there was nowhere to go. His head pounded, and the cold made his whole body shiver uncontrollably. He banged on the door, calling out for help, but no one answered. No one came. Ethan had one way to reach me: his emergency phone. I had always told him, "If you ever need me for any reason, just call." And he had been trying to do just that. Except Emily took his phone away at the start of the party. She has this strict no screens rule in her house, and she decided that even though it was an emergency phone, it was still a screen. So when Ethan asked for it back to call me, she flat out refused. Meanwhile, I had been calling Emily over and over to check in on him. I had told her earlier that he wasn't feeling great, so I wanted to make sure he was okay. But every time I called, she ignored it. She saw my name on the screen and just let it ring. Because in her mind, she was busy throwing a birthday party. That was more important. For almost 3 hours, my son was locked in that freezing basement, sick, scared, and completely alone, while I sat in a movie theater having no idea what was happening. For the first couple of hours, Sarah and I were enjoying our night out. It wasn't often that we got an evening to ourselves, so we grabbed dinner, caught a movie, and tried to relax. But the whole time something felt off. I had texted Emily earlier just to check in, but she hadn't responded. That wasn't too strange. She was hosting a party after all. Still, I had this weird feeling I couldn't shake. So I called her. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Sarah noticed me getting restless and asked, "Something wrong?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Emily's not answering, and I haven't heard from Ethan either." That's when I remembered his emergency phone. I shot him a quick text. No reply. At that point, my gut was screaming that something wasn't right. Emily might be busy, but Ethan? He always answered. That's when I decided, screw it. We're going over there. It was getting late anyway, and if Ethan wasn't feeling well, we'd just pick him up early. By the time we pulled up to Emily's house, most of the party had died down. Parents were gathering their kids, and the decorations looked a little deflated from all the excitement. Inside, there were only a handful of kids left, lounging in the living room watching TV. But Ethan wasn't one of them. At first, I thought maybe he had fallen asleep in a corner somewhere. I asked Dylan, "Hey, where's Ethan?" Dylan just shrugged. "I don't know." That's when I saw Emily's face, and something was wrong. She looked uncomfortable, almost guilty. Her whole body language screamed, "I don't want to have this conversation." "Oh, he's in the other room," she said quickly. "Just hang tight, I'll go get him." I stared at her. "Which room?" She hesitated, just for a second, but it was long enough. Something was seriously wrong. I didn't wait for her to answer. I pushed past her and started checking rooms myself. Sarah followed right behind me, demanding, "Where is he, Emily?" Emily tried to stop us. "Wait. Just listen, it's not a big deal, okay?" He was being difficult, so I just... That's when it hit me. She wasn't going to the bedrooms. She was heading toward the basement door. My heart dropped. "Emily," I said, voice tight, "tell me you didn't." But she wouldn't meet my eyes. I yanked the door open, and there he was. Ethan was curled up on the floor, shivering, his face pale and his body trembling. His eyes were barely open, and the second I saw him, I knew he was too weak to even stand. The basement reeked of vomit, and his little hands were balled up into fists like he had been trying to keep himself warm. I think I screamed. I don't even know what I said. Sarah rushed past me, dropping to her knees beside him, running her hands over his clammy face, whispering, "Oh my God, baby, we're here. We're here." I spun around to Emily, rage boiling in my chest. "You locked him down here?" She tried to justify it. "I didn't think it was that bad. I thought he was just being dramatic. I was going to let him out after the party." I didn't even hear the rest. I scooped Ethan up in my arms, his body limp against mine, and bolted for the door. "Get in the car," I told Sarah. "We're going to the hospital. Now." Emily followed us, stammering apologies, but I didn't care. I didn't care about anything except the fact that my son could have died in that basement. I don't think I've ever driven faster in my life. My hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles turned white. Sarah sat in the back seat with Ethan, wrapping him in her jacket, rubbing his arms, whispering to him to stay awake. "Baby, we're almost there," she kept saying. "Just hold on." Ethan barely responded. His body was limp, his skin was cold, and his breathing was slow. Every few minutes he'd let out a weak whimper, but that was it. No complaints. No questions. Nothing. That scared the hell out of me. We rushed into the ER, barely able to explain what had happened before the nurses took him from our arms and wheeled him back. They asked if he had eaten anything strange, if he had hit his head, if he had any medical conditions they should know about. But my mind was spinning and all I could say was, he was locked in a basement. For hours. Alone. I don't even remember how long we waited. Time felt warped, stretched, like we were stuck in some horrible limbo. At some point, Emily showed up at the hospital. I saw her pacing near the waiting area, wringing her hands, her face red from crying. She tried to come up to me, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said. My voice was low, dangerous. "You're the last person I want to see right now." She opened her mouth to speak, but Sarah cut her off. "You left him down there, Emily," she said, shaking her head. "He could have." Her voice broke and she turned away, wiping her eyes. Emily just stood there, tears running down her face, but I didn't care. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses. I don't know how long we were there before my dad showed up. And Jason, Emily's husband, was with him. Apparently, after all the guests had left the party, Jason had noticed Emily was gone. When she finally admitted that she was at the hospital, she hadn't even told him why. Just that there had been an incident. So when my dad and Jason walked in and saw me standing there, saw Sarah crying, saw the way Emily was sitting in a chair, head in her hands, they knew something was seriously wrong. Jason was the first to ask, "What the hell is going on?" I didn't hesitate. I told them everything. I told them how Ethan had been feeling sick, how Emily ignored him, how she locked him in the cold basement and forgot about him for hours, how I found him shaking, barely conscious, covered in his own vomit. Jason's face went white. He turned to Emily, his voice low and trembling. "Tell me this isn't true." She started stammering. I didn't think it was that bad. I thought he was making it up, Jason. I was busy with the party but he wasn't listening anymore. His whole body was tense, like he was holding himself back from completely losing it. Then I turned to my dad. His expression scared me the most. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't even look at Emily. He just stood there, completely still, staring at the floor. And when he finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. "I can't believe this," he muttered. "I raised you better than this, Emily." Emily started sobbing. "Dad, please." But he didn't let her finish. My dad took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. When he looked up, there was no emotion in his eyes. "I was planning on setting up a trust fund," he said. "For both of you. Something for the future. I wanted to make sure you were both taken care of." Emily froze. "Dad." "But not anymore," he continued, his voice like steel. "I don't trust you. And after what you did, I can't, in good conscience, leave you anything." Emily gasped. "What? Dad, you can't be serious." "I'm very serious," he said. "Everything will go to Ethan and Dylan. And your name? It won't be on any of it." Jason didn't say a word. He just clenched his jaw, staring at Emily like he didn't even recognize her anymore. Emily, on the other hand, completely broke down. She kept pleading, kept begging, kept saying it was an accident, that she hadn't meant for things to go this far. But nobody cared. Nobody wanted to hear it. I wasn't sure if my dad's decision was too harsh, but in that moment I didn't care. All I cared about was my son, and making sure Emily never had the chance to hurt him again. The days after the hospital visit were a blur. Ethan was recovering, still weak and shaken, but physically he was going to be okay. Mentally, though, that was a different story. He had nightmares. He'd wake up crying, clutching onto Sarah or me, mumbling things about being stuck or too cold. Killed me. My kid, my strong, happy kid, was scared in his own home because of what my own sister had done to him. And then there was Emily. She wouldn't stop calling, texting, begging. Please, I didn't mean to hurt him. You have to talk to Dad, he's being too harsh. I made a mistake, but I love Ethan. Please don't shut me out. First I ignored her. I was too angry, too disgusted to even think about what she had to say. But the more she begged, the more this weird mix of emotions started creeping in. Anger, resentment, and strangely enough, guilt. Not guilt for her, guilt for what my dad had done. I hadn't thought much about the trust fund at first. In that moment it didn't matter. All that mattered was Ethan. But when the dust settled, I started really thinking about it. Before this whole mess, my dad had planned to divide everything equally between me and Emily. The grandkids were always supposed to be the priority, but now it was just me and the kids. And I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I mean, yeah, Emily deserved consequences, but was cutting her off entirely too much? Was this something she could ever make up for? Did she really deserve to be erased from my dad's financial plans forever? It felt weird. Like I was benefiting from her screw-up. Like I was profiting off my son's suffering. I didn't ask for this. I didn't pressure my dad into doing it. But now that I was the one set to inherit, I couldn't shake this uncomfortable feeling. Sarah told me not to overthink it. You didn't do anything wrong, she said. Your dad made his own decision. If he doesn't trust Emily with anything after what she did, that's on her. Not you. I knew she was right. But it didn't make the situation any easier to accept. As the days passed, one thought kept nagging at me. What if this wasn't the first time Emily had done something like this? She had a son of her own. She sometimes had other kids over at her house. If she was capable of locking my sick child in a freezing basement, what else had she done? I brought it up with Sarah one night. She has a temper, I admitted. I've seen it before. I just never thought she'd. I sighed. I don't know. Should we be reporting this? Sarah didn't even hesitate. Yes, she was right. If this had been anyone else, I wouldn't have even questioned it. I would have gone straight to Child Protective Services. But because it was my sister, I was hesitating. That realization hit me like a truck. We had to do it. For Ethan. For Dylan. For every other kid who might end up in her care. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want her life ruined. But I wanted to make sure no other child ever went through what Ethan did. The next morning I made the call. And once CPS got involved, there was no going back. I knew calling CPS would open a door that couldn't be closed. But at that point I had made peace with it. I wasn't doing this to ruin Emily's life. I was doing it to make sure no other kid suffered the way Ethan did. Within a few days, a CPS caseworker got in touch with us. She was professional but firm, asking Sarah and me to recount everything in detail. She listened carefully, took notes, and then spoke to Ethan privately. I was nervous about that part. He was still shaken, and I didn't want him to feel like he was being interrogated. But when he came back out, I could tell he had handled it better than I expected. She was nice, he said quietly. She just wanted to know what happened. A few days later they contacted Emily. That's when things really escalated. Emily called me after they visited. For once she wasn't yelling or begging. She just sounded tired. They came to the house, she admitted. Talked to me. Talked to Jason. Even talked to Dylan. I waited for her to say more, but when she didn't I finally asked, and? She let out a long breath. They said I need to take parenting classes. Counseling too. And for now, I'm not allowed to be alone with any kids, including my own. I wasn't surprised by CPS's decision. Honestly, it was the best possible outcome for her. They didn't remove Dylan. They didn't press any charges. They didn't put her on any kind of blacklist. But they made it very clear that her behavior had crossed a serious line. Jason, her own husband, agreed with CPS's recommendation. He told them he'd make sure she followed through, and that until she did, he would be the one handling their son's care. I don't know what to do, Emily whispered on the phone. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I sighed. Yeah, well, it did. Silence. Will you ever forgive me? She finally asked. I didn't have an answer for that. One person who definitely wasn't budging, Dad. He had been keeping his distance from Emily since the hospital incident, and when I told him about the CPS decision, he barely reacted. "She's lucky," was all he said. I knew what he meant. Lucky that all she got was mandatory parenting classes. Lucky that I hadn't pressed charges. Lucky that she hadn't lost custody of Dylan. And when I brought up the trust fund again, he shut it down immediately. "My decision is final," he said. "I don't trust her. I won't reward her for this." Emily had begged me to talk to him to try and convince him to reconsider. But I wasn't going to, because the truth was I didn't trust her either. She could cry, she could apologize, she could swear up and down that it would never happen again. But at the end of the day, she had locked my sick son in a freezing basement and forgotten about him. And that wasn't something I could ever just let go. After the CPS investigation, things didn't just go back to normal. Emily's world had changed, and she had to deal with the consequences. Jason was still furious. Even though he hadn't left her, their marriage was badly shaken. He couldn't look at her the same way after what she did, not just because of how she treated Ethan, but because she lied about it to everyone. From what I heard, he barely spoke to her for weeks. When he did, it was only about Dylan. Eventually, they decided to go to marriage counseling. Jason made it clear that if Emily wanted to fix their relationship, she had to take responsibility. Not just say sorry, but actually change. It wasn't just about their marriage either. CPS had given them a strict plan to follow, and if she wanted to get back to a normal life, she had to show real effort. For once, Emily didn't fight it. She went to every counseling session, did the parenting classes, and followed every rule. But the damage was already done. For a long time, I didn't speak to Emily. I needed space. I wasn't ready to forgive her, and honestly, I didn't even know if I wanted to. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore: Dylan and Ethan. No matter how messed up things were between Emily and me, our kids still saw each other as best friends. They didn't understand the full weight of what happened. To them, it was simple. Why can't I see my cousin anymore? And that broke me. So, after a lot of thinking, I decided to allow playdates, but on my terms. Dylan could come over to our house anytime. But I wasn't ready to let Ethan go to Emily's. Not yet. Sarah and I made it clear. No unsupervised visits. No direct contact between Emily and Ethan. If Dylan wanted to come over, Jason would have to drop him off. Emily didn't fight it. She just nodded and agreed. I think she knew she didn't have a choice. Ethan was happy to have his cousin back. And seeing them play again, it gave me a little hope that maybe, just maybe, we weren't completely broken beyond repair. While I was trying to navigate where to go from here, my dad wasn't even thinking about that. He was done with Emily. She had tried reaching out to him multiple times, but he ignored every call and message. He refused to see her, refused to talk about her, and made it very clear that she was no longer his responsibility. First, I thought he was just giving himself time. But after months of silence, it became clear. He had cut her out for good. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me understood. But part of me also wondered, is there ever a way back from something like this? I don't have an answer yet. And maybe I never will. But for now, I'm focused on the only thing that really matters: protecting my son and moving forward the best way I can. Looking back, I never would have thought my own sister, someone I trusted, someone I grew up with, would put my son in danger. Not just by accident, not in a moment of panic, but by making a deliberate choice to ignore him, punish him, and then forget about him. It's been months now, and while Ethan has mostly bounced back, I haven't. I still think about that night, about how close we came to something far worse. I think about how he called for help and no one came. I think about how, if Sarah and I had decided to stay out just a little longer, we might not have gotten there in time. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you. There are moments when I miss the way things were, when I could just trust my family without thinking twice. But that version of my life is gone. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust Emily again. And honestly, I don't know if I want to. One thing this whole ordeal has taught me is that family doesn't mean blind loyalty. For a long time I thought blood meant you always forgave, always found a way to move forward no matter what. But now I know that being family isn't a free pass. Emily thought she could get away with what she did because at the end of the day we were family. She assumed I'd forgive her, that Dad would get over it, that Jason would move past it. But that's not how this works. Actions have consequences. Being someone's sister doesn't mean you can hurt their child and expect everything to go back to normal. I chose my son. I would choose him every single time, even if it meant cutting off my own sister forever. Right now things are tense. Emily is still in counseling. She and Jason are trying to rebuild their marriage, and from what I've heard, it's been rough. My dad still refuses to speak to her. I don't know if that will ever change. As for me, I'm keeping my distance. I still don't want her near Ethan. She's not ready for that. But I also don't want my anger to control my life. That's why I let Dylan and Ethan stay close. They deserve to be kids. They don't need to carry the weight of our mistakes. So for now we move forward carefully. I don't know what the future holds for my family. Maybe one day things will heal. Maybe they won't. But if there's one thing I know for sure, it's this. I will never let anyone, family or not, put my son in danger again.